Hi, I'm Phil Konstantin. In this edition of Travels with Phil, we are traveling back in time to 1977. This is one in a series of interviews I did for a program called To the Point for Rice University in Houston. I helped to create this program, which showcased some of the brilliant people associated with Rice. In this episode, we're talking with Rice professor Konstantin Kolenda. We discuss some of the issues related to ethics and high school students. Dr. Kolenda received a B.A. from the Rice Institute in 1950. For 3 years, he was a Susan Linn Sage Fellow in the Philosophy Department at Cornell University and received the Ph.D. degree from Cornell in 1953, where he quickly joined the Rice staff. At the time of this recording in 1977, he was a professor of philosophy. As a Fulbright Scholar, he also lectured on American philosophy at the University of Heidelberg in 1959 through 60. In addition to articles in scholarly journals, his publications include a translation of Arthur Schopenhauer's essay on the freedom of the will and a book entitled The Freedom of Reason. He was president of the Southwest Philosophical Society and the North American representative of the Aristotelian Society of England. He was a visiting professor of philosophy at the United States Military Academy at West Point and was awarded the Outstanding Civilian Service Medal from the Department of the Army. Twice he was chairman of the Department of Philosophy at Rice from 1968 to 1975 and again in 1990 to 1991. You can see some of his accomplishments and awards in the description field below here on the YouTube page. I've added images for this video, but the audio remains exactly as it was originally broadcast in 1977.
It's been observed recently that more and more high school students are becoming more cynical about life. We'll discuss a possible solution to that in just a moment.
To the Point, presented by Rice University.
Good morning, I'm Phil Konstantin, and with me this morning is Dr. Konstantin Kolenda, a professor of philosophy at Rice University, and we're going to be talking about ethics for high school students. And what exactly would you consider ethics for a high school student? How would you go about approaching explaining this to somebody?
First thing to do when one is talking about ethics is to dispel the idea that it's something very, very extraordinary, something special, something ethereal, something that really belongs in the world of its own. It seems to be ethics is an inquiry about daily life, about the daily existence, about problems that come your way from all directions. So there's no way to avoid thinking about ethics. The question is how one thinks, how well one thinks about it.
Are you trying to, and I should guess I should regress a mite and say that you've written a book called Ethics for the Young, which is being used in several high schools in the area.
2 so far, Madison and Westbury.
Well, then a few in that case rather than several. And how do you actually go about teaching this in the sense that you're not, or are you saying that this is good and this is bad, or are you trying to have people think for themselves what is good and bad, or are you even relating it to a good and bad kind of relationship?
The question of goodness or badness obviously arises, but one shouldn't start with it. What one should start is a certain layout of options, and the layout of options shouldn't occur in a vacuum. It should occur within the context of dealings, concerns, realities that people are surrounded by.
So is the course more based on the fact that people should look for more options or more alternatives to their possible actions to things in their own lives? Is that what the basics of the course would be as it's taught?
Any serious approach to anything, and I suppose one should take life seriously, requires some kind of respect for things that come one's way. I think a person who is keeping his or her eyes open and is trying to be fair to all the things that come their way is more likely to come with good, sensible decisions than the one who has rather shorthand approaches to things which are usually short-sighted and rather narrow.
Well, in my opening statement, I said that high school students have appeared to be more and more cynical, and some people have called this a Watergate syndrome. Not necessarily true in some ways, but it has appeared that as time goes by, more and more people are becoming cynical. And high school students have shown this remarkably from what I've seen in my own experiences. Is this a possible just modern event, or is this something that is just becoming more noticed as more and more social scientists are going out into the field, or just there's more and more possibility of the youth speaking out on things rather than just keeping quiet?
It is conditioned by what is going on around us, and things like Watergate certainly have contributed to this sense of the need to be more careful, more aware of the consequence of one's actions. And on the whole, I tend to be optimistic about it. I think it's good that finally we have come around to the idea of wanting to be more careful in trying to decide questions of importance to us personally and socially. So I don't think that we somehow have reached the bottom, that things are so bad we have to do something drastic. I think it's a healthy development. I wish we had it sooner, but now that we're doing it, let's do it well.
Which way did Watergate work? Did this make people decide that they were going to be good, or did this make people think, and we can't necessarily just say Watergate per se, but somewhat of the attitude that was prevalent in that time period, or has this made people say, well, it doesn't really matter anyway?
I think it brought home to us that some decisions are extremely important, and they are after effects, maybe so far-reaching that we really won't like them when we see them happen, and especially when they do happen in places where one expects the opposite. So it merely brings home to us that decisions have consequences, and decisions by people in power in particular can affect us in such a way that we will really suffer long-range consequences. I think this is one of the things that one can expect from ethical consciousness. I'm glad to see that there has been this reaction to what's going on in Washington, because it indicates that there is a certain moral health in the country, in the people, that we don't want horrible things to happen. And we decided that they are really actually horrible things, as seems to be the case. Then it's good that we are reacting to it with a certain degree of indignation.
How can you teach in the classroom itself, though, this ethical consciousness?
You don't have to teach it, really. You merely point out what people already know. I think in any teaching situation, especially in ethics, one is not handing anything down. One merely trying to encourage people to weigh for themselves what they are really concerned about. Why is the health of our government important? Well, because what people decide in Washington affects us in very important ways.
Well, let's get into some of the specifics. Say that in a classroom, some of the topics that would either be discussed or brought up, how was the actual course presented using the material that you have provided?
I went to a couple of the sessions at Madison High School. The course was taught by a social science teacher, and she simply followed the order of the book, which consists of 6 chapters. And the essential thrust is to present various types of situations or types of realities that we deal with, and then having looked at the entire structure of this relationship, raise questions about them. Each chapter is followed up by a set of questions, and most of the time was really spent on trying to handle these questions. Now, these questions were not testing questions, but they were encouraging people to think further along the lines already suggested. So it is a kind of encouragement for further search in the direction suggested by the text.
Well, in here you talk about how do you develop character, and how do you actually come across this in class? What kind of questions would you ask to stimulate a person to think about this subject, if you're not exactly saying first you help little ladies across the street or something like that?
As you have noticed perhaps in my book, I have the discussions of character at the very end. The last chapter is called Finding Yourself. And the reason why I put these questions about the character, about moral virtues, moral values, about deciding for a career for oneself, trying to change your environment, contributing something to it. The reason why I put these questions about oneself at the end is because seems to be they ought to be preceded by a kind of a survey of the types of things with which we have to deal. And perhaps I should mention these types in their order, in the order in which they come. I start out with the account of physical things. I call this chapter Managing Things, which includes such fundamental things as food, shelter, clothing, and also one's body. What one does to one's body with one's body. That includes also things like drugs or alcohol, or also the sex, because this is also part of the physical well-being, biological being. So once you have gotten this area out of the way, you can now turn your attention to what I call living with others. And by others, I mean people who are close to you in some ways, your parents, brothers and sisters, teachers, a one-to-one relationship. And I think this is a very important area. It starts very early, and one has to give it special consideration. And parents matter to us much more than other people. And there are special problems arising from this close living with the parents, and the kinds of relationship that develop are determined by this intimacy. Now, once you discuss this, the natural move is toward society, toward institutions, toward things like government, schools, business world, industry, these so-called abstract entities where people exist, where people do things, but they don't do it as individuals, they do it as members of an organization. And the relation to institutions, therefore, is a very special kind of problems. One of the difficulties we have with institutions, that really relates to Watergate as well, very often we begin to develop certain sense of alienation or distance from the institutions. Because the institutions are not personal entities, we tend to somehow develop hostilities toward them. We think, oh, some impersonal force is pushing us around. But one thing to remember, the institutions are run by people, and every institution has a certain purpose behind it. And very often that purpose is in our interest. One goes to school because one wants some things, namely to get educated, wants to learn some things.
And the police department is a better idea.
Police department is also, I'm discussing that too. So there are things one has to look from both sides when talking about institutions. And past that, maybe I continue sort of a long-winded presentation, but so far I mentioned 3 items: managing things, physical things, personal relations, third, institutions. Now, you don't have to be satisfied with that look. You can look also at a wider geographical, historical context in which you live, because after all, the world changes. It's not the same what it was yesterday, and you might develop some sort of orientation in the world at large and try to be worried about its direction. And finally, after one has looked at these various perimeters of one's situation, then one can ask oneself, this being the world that I'm dealing with, what place do I have in it? What does it have for me? How do I manage it? How do I find my own place in it? What should be my direction? So it seems the concern with oneself should come at the end rather than at the beginning.
Is there any possibility this could be construed as sensitivity training?
Yes, it is sensitivity training, but I don't like the word sensitivity because, like many other things nowadays, they leave out the mind. They leave out intelligence. Sensitivity suggests that all you need to be is nicely sensitive, that everything will fall in its place. But education involves training of the mind, first of all, primarily, not to the exclusion of the emotions, but one should always try to find one's way in terms of understanding. So this is why I object to these just naked appeals to emotion, to sensitivity.
Right. I want to read one of the questions you have for discussion in the back of the book. It says, you have a friend who secretly smokes cigarettes. One day you are waiting for your friend's return to his house, and his mother tells you that she would be worried about her children's health if they smoke cigarettes. How would you react? Would you tell her that her son smokes, and if so, why, and if not, why not? Now, I'm curious about that. We haven't got much time, but assuming that you're going to get a grade in a class like this, is it not possible that you would get somewhat of an institutional morality if, or how would you be graded in a class like this? According to your answers or according to the processes you go through to get your answers?
Phil, as you look at this question, you probably realize yourself that you wouldn't quite know how to answer. Neither do I. Because what it illustrates, it's a dilemma. It's a moral dilemma. You want to retain your friendship. You don't want to rat on people. You don't want to tell something about them that they won't like. At the same time, you are genuinely somehow on their side. You know, you like to somehow affect them in a good way. So it's one of the situations where you, first of all, recognize there are 2 conflicting values, that each of them matters. How do you resolve it? It will depend how closely you are related to your friend, how honest you can be with him, and how honest you can be with the parents. The consequence of this kind of reflection would be, see, it would be nice if we could tell the truth to both of them, and if we all three of you could sit together and discuss it in some kind of a helpful way. Maybe that would affect his behavior, maybe it would change his parents' point of view, but the objective of the question is to elicit the most honest, most positive, most helpful responses from all parties involved. This is the object. Therefore, there is no yes or no answer
Right.
to this.
So essentially, this is a structural
That's
form
right.
that you're trying to get
Yes.
conveyed to the children.
Yes.
Well, I've enjoyed having you here. This has been Phil Konstantin talking to Konstantin Kolenda. I just love your first name. Thank you for being on the program. We hope you like the program, and we will hope you'll be back next Sunday.
To the Point is produced by the Rice University Information Office at the studios of Rice Radio, KTRU, in Houston.
Thank you very much for watching this video. Please feel free to leave comments down below as long as the language is family friendly. And if you would like to subscribe to my channel, just click on the button over on the right hand side. Thank you very much.